All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. It looks like people have stopped coming in. But I just want to thank everybody for tuning in and joining us for the Black Belt Help Tech Talk. And the topic for today is the future of AI in higher education's help desk support. My name is Frank Mortimer. I'll be your host today. And as I was saying earlier, that if you have any questions, that at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. Just put your questions in there, and we will be happy to get to those at the end of the webinar. And now I'd like to introduce you to our panelist, our expert, Michael Zastudil. He's the senior, sorry, Michael Zastudil, the Senior VP for Customer Success and Product Management here at Black Belt Help. And Michael's been focused on contact center AI innovations for over a decade. So, Michael, I want to thank you for coming over and to talk to us about the benefits of AI for college and university support teams. And so why don't you kick us off, Michael, by telling us your background and how you got into higher ed and ed tech veteran.
Sure. So a little over 10 years ago, about 13 years ago, actually, I got into higher education tech. And, a few years into primarily supporting students, by the way, in terms of OneStop support around financial aid, student accounts, as well as IT help desk. So, I've pretty much spent, this part of my career on help desk in one form or another. So I was very interested as, the technology for chatbots and automation started to become more available, and not just for the corporate entities, but then also within higher education, because of course, it's a very different situation with higher ed and adoption of technology. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But I was very interested in understanding more about how it can help students, how it can help, our customers, and make sure that, they're utilizing it to its full advantage. So I spent a lot of time learning, doing a lot of reading. And so one of the reasons that I took over product management here was that I wanted to be able to realize some of those really higher-minded goals, right, and helping our institutions be more efficient and effective.
Well, with your vast history, could you kind of give everybody an overview of what is AI and what's its history specifically in the help desk world?
So it's a pretty big topic. I wanted to kind of set a couple, as I was thinking about this webinar today, I wanted to set some guidelines around what, where my expertise lies and really where it doesn't. So we are primarily going to be focusing on how it supports help desk, and that can be a lot of different things. But let me tell you what it's not, and that can help to kind of define what the subject matter will be. So we're not going to be talking about how AI is impacting academics in the classroom. I think that that's a very broad and complex, really, solution that almost any kind of institution of higher learning or even K-12 is really struggling with right now. So I do liken that a little bit to the advent of calculators and, not wanting to have calculators be used in the classroom. So I think it is going to fundamentally change the way we teach. And I think stopping that is going to be kind of counterproductive, because these are the tools that, the students of today will be using tomorrow. So I think it's important to educate them on how to efficiently, effectively, and accurately use AI to support, whatever work they might be doing. So enough on the academic piece. I do think that, we're not going to cover some of the recent news with a lot of the executives and researchers from the AI community, suggesting that, that AI poses an extinction risk. And that's actually the word that they had. I think that that's obviously even a bigger question, and I have no idea how that's going to impact society. I wish I could predict the future, but I don't think we can even conceive of some of the things that AI will be available to help us with. I mean, we're already having doctors and scientists diagnose sickness, right, and medical conditions with increasing accuracy. I mean, that's just one small thing that we're using today. I'm sure that when one way or another you've probably been exposed to, or at least aware of. The one thing that I do want to mention is that in any technology, it's not perfect, right? So I'm going to speak a lot about ChatGPT because that's what people are more familiar with. There's a lot of other solutions out there, some that to what ChatGPT does, and some that actually go a little bit further. But I think it's important to note that there is a fear that there are inaccuracies in how ChatGPT can deliver content. So just a really basic explanation of how ChatGPT works. It's a natural language processing tool. That's what really, well, there's two things, but that's the real power. And it's very conversational. Can understand over 1,000 words within a conversation, and it very well understands what you're trying to ask it to do, or whatever task you might give it, right? So I think that the bottom line is that it's important to understand what it does and what it doesn't do. It's not generative AI, which in that it makes decisions based on data. What it does is it quickly is able to pull together a corpus of knowledge and be able to organize it in an efficient way and then access it really quickly. So the version that's publicly available and free, it's free on the internet. You can just go to openai.com, and I suggest that you do and play around with it. But it basically is they entered or made available the entire web, or internet web, I'm dating myself, the internet from 2021. So anything after 2021 on this version is not included, right? So this is really just for testing. Now, there are, more advanced versions now that are, that you can license to get, data further out, right? Or I'm sorry, more recently.
Now, but with specifically for the help desk world, there has been some AI that's been around for a little bit longer than that, correct?
Oh, sure. So, thinking about, the evolution, it really depended on, the amount of data that could be stored, the amount of data that could be processed. And that's what's really accelerated the growth quite a bit. I mean, a lot of this research was going on in the background. So a lot of those things have, been involved in a long time. I mean, back in the 90s, companies started using the IVR, the interactive voice response, in order to direct calls to the right location, right, to the right agent, the right advisor, depending upon what the caller's inputs were. So that's a form of AI, right? But I mean, this has gone through several iterations to where, more familiar chatbots, you'll see on a lot of different websites, some of those are more FAQ based chatbots where there's all programmed with information that is accessible. But it's really just the content that you train on it. And I'll say train, build, and I'll come back to this concept, but really it's about accessing that information, delivering it in an effective way to solve specific use cases.
Excellent. So go ahead.
So yeah, no, I'm going to get into a little bit more of, the future of where things go and talk a little bit more about where we are today, but just suffice to say that outside of the speech recognition, there's analytics to identify speech patterns. Those things are available today, but probably not necessarily an expense that really can be justified. But I think it's as the technology becomes more superfluous, those costs will drop.
Excellent. So you keep talking about the future. So why will AI be such a big deal for help desk support?
Well, I think it already is. I mean, it's already been a disruptor. If you look at, most companies that are associated in one way or another with support, whether it be, customers, students, wherever that might be. There's a constant drive to create efficiencies, to reduce costs, but then also provide, the best end user experience that you can. Mm-hmm. So those things actually match up, right? And they meet up when you're talking about what users expect, which is quick, relevant help, right? And then on the flip side of that, you've got real costs. So when you think about, the phone ringing, right? Whether or not you have a contact center, right, where it's an agent sitting at a phone with a headset and what you think of traditionally as a contact center, or it's the financial aid office with the phone ringing off the hook, right? You've got real cost and you've got real need to support those students, in particular, talking about higher ed, and being able to touch and engage with those students as much as possible is incredibly valuable, right? And you can't necessarily do that with just with just individuals, right? With just humans. So, the AI does not replace humans. There's always going to be a human element, but it does make the work more efficient and for those humans, so they can focus on humans. They can focus on more complex issues and probably spend a lot more time with students who need a lot more time. But AI can help them get it to the right place in a much faster way, and it can also take care of more repetitive questions, so you're not constantly answering the same thing.
Yeah, and that by answering the same questions over and over, number one, that takes man hours to do that, and two, like you said, repetitive. It can not be good for job satisfaction. So if you have a bot that can handle those things, I think, as you said, then that leaves the staff to then handle more complex user cases that they can dig into and actually do something meaningful.
Yeah, it's a really challenging job, whether you're handling, phone calls or you're at a front counter, say at a OneStop, an institution, particularly around the fall and spring, because you sometimes have lines out the door and the phone is ringing. And you want to be able to really focus on that individual in front of you and providing the best support possible.
Well, and the person in front of them, and you mentioned it a few times, is students. And so could you talk a little bit about what do students think of AI and how are they responding to it?
It's really interesting. I was just reading a couple of articles and feedback from institutions who have used chatbots in various different ways. And, initially I had said, and I had done a similar presentation on AI several years ago, and I had said, look, students expect that there's some level of personalization and automation, because they get that in their personal lives, right? Anybody that's contacted Amazon or contacted any of the major corporations, have that experience, and so it's definitely not a turnoff. You want to make sure that there's always an off ramp, though, because it's not for everybody. But the thing that I found most interesting is that they found that students actually asked questions that they wouldn't normally ask of a person, because it was that fear of a stupid question, that they actually had a bit of a bond with the chatbot, provided it was, it was effective. But that was really a great way to make that connection, make that engagement with the student, where it actually helped a lot of students from minority backgrounds who, may be even more timid or shy about asking specific questions that they may not know or may think that they should already know the answer to. So I found that fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's funny, like you think about like how as parents especially, we want to make sure kids don't have a lot of screen time, but all that screen time makes them feel closer to technology and that they feel comfortable with that.
Yeah,
it might be people like you and I that would not be as comfortable, right?
Well, if they know it's a bot, which is another key point, if I don't cover it later, I think it's very important that you communicate that clearly up front, because we do have students who ask questions as if it were a person. So you want to make sure that you let them know. But if it is a bot, they tend to be more open and, have a much better experience. It's fascinating. I'd love to learn more about that.
Well, and so just to kind of recap a few of the things that you've been saying is number one, that AI can take care of a lot of the, I'll call it low level, the repetitive questions that get asked. And it's also something that students like to engage with. Two points that come out of that for me is one, could you talk about how that could potentially lead to reducing costs and helping budgets for schools? And then two, is there anything else that AI solutions could be used for within the help desk?
Yeah. So strategically, there are lots of examples where using AI in one form or another, or one use case or another, can support enrollment growth and retention, and graduation rates, right? So there's some evidence to suggest that on a strategic level, which these are the top things that schools think about, leadership think about night and day. That's huge, and I think obviously, and then I think that for the other piece, from a more tactical perspective, right, budgets are shrinking, right? Staffing is difficult from time to time, and particularly staffing outside of business hours, right? So this is a tool and an agent that's available 24/7. Right. This is a technology that a student can reach out at any point, where you don't need to staff that nights and weekend support to the degree that you might have had to, or work with another another company to partner with them to provide. Right. So it also helps to reduce the amount of calls, emails, chats that may need to be escalated to a person. As I said before, the goal here is, and this is not to replace people at all, not to replace staff, because what we find is that staff actually end up focusing on more interesting work, and they can also then take on more work, right? More productive work that helps with the staffing aspect, because it's not just that the staffing is not just about the hiring, it's about the retaining, right? Because you don't want to have that constant revolving door, and this helps with that, right? And in particular, it creates jobs, right? Because a lot of institutions may not be managing their knowledge, and I'm speak specifically about the help desk aspect of this, but they may not be managing the knowledge. And anybody who has experience with help desk knows that regardless of whether it is a chatbot or it is an agent or an advisor, there still needs to be information that needs to be accessed, right? So think about, from a practical standpoint, taking somebody that's answering the phone to somebody who's managing that data and becomes a knowledge manager, right? And then can also then develop the professional skills to then take it to the next level.
I think that's a perfect segue to where I want to go to next. As our guests today are all from universities, so their big question has to be, and I'm guessing this, is what challenges will they be facing when they want to implement AI? Or, hey, I got my chat bot, now what do I do?
I think that certainly, several years ago when chatbots became more pervasive, there was this expectation that it was a plug and play. Hey, this is going to look at all our information and answer all the questions, right? So that's definitely not the case. I think the biggest thing is, what problem are you trying to solve, or what benefit are you trying to get out of the chatbot or the text bot? I'm talking a lot about chatbot, but that's the most recognizable usage of that. So I just want to make sure that I clarify that. You also use this through SMS, social media, et cetera. It's really the same engine that's driving all of it, and the media that you use it in may change, right?
So give us an example of some of the problems that you're referring to that we're trying to solve.
So I think, first of all, I experience this all the time, which is you've got a lot of stakeholders who might be decision makers who don't really understand the technology and what it can do and what it can't do. So it's important to be able to clearly define the capabilities of what you're trying to implement and the problem that you're trying to solve. And just like with anything else, you've got multiple stakeholders and across the institution And particularly faculty members might be very anti-AI because they're dealing with those academic issues. So to them, it all kind of rolls up into one thing. So you really need to make sure that you understand the audience as you're implementing, right? And that's important to be able to define ownership and understand that there is a time commitment, whether or not an institution contracts with somebody who is helping to build that data, or the institution itself is building the data. There's a level of effort there over and above, the technical implementation of the chatbot itself. So you really got to decide, like I said, it's really important to maybe even start with a smaller scope, right? And then expand it out and just make that small scope work, right? Make sure that that's working the way you want it to work and you're getting the results that you want.
And then once they do that, then they can roll it out to others as well, is what you're saying.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so even within a department, there might be 10 things that are repetitive, right? So focus on those 10 things. Be clear to users, to students, that this is what it does. This is what I can help you with. And if you need something else, give us a call, send an email, submit a ticket, whatever those things might be. And get those 10 things right.
And bots could even be set up if it's not something that it covers. It could push the student the other direction, correct?
It can direct the student, right? Almost like a smart switchboard, right? And that's relatively easy to do, right? And think about it like a better looking IVR.
Gotcha. Well, so number one, you're saying, okay, start off small, figure out something that you can get accomplished by using the AI bots, and have that, make sure you have all of your stakeholders on the same page and that they understand what it can do and it can't do. So let's continue on. What are some of the best practices that schools should consider when managing and deploying AI?
Well, I think they need to understand that data and data integrity is always an issue. You want to make sure that you are clear about that. There's some, every school is going to be different, but I think that you need to review that with the security officer. I think it's always good anytime you're making a technology purchase. It might be a requirement, but I think that's important to do. And understand that, sometimes the chatbots will lie convincingly. Now, the stakes aren't that high for us, but what I mean by the reason I bring that up is because it's really important to maintain and manage that data, right? So it's not just about, hey, this is the information we want and we've organized that information and fed it into the bot, but you also need to make sure that you're monitoring it, looking at survey scores, looking at survey feedback, looking at the actual transcripts of the conversation themselves and seeing how you can improve it. And that takes a level of effort that needs to be planned for, right? There really should be somebody who owns that or a group that owns it. And I've seen really successful situations where institutions will actually use student workers or ask student workers to do that. And I think that that's a fantastic thing, right? Because who knows better, right, than the student workers. And obviously that's a great opportunity for them to become more familiar with the capabilities and see if that's something they want to pursue, because it's going to be important for them in their learning journey.
So day in and day out, you're constantly interfacing with people in higher ed. So what are some of the main questions that you get asked about AI and chatbots?
Well, I think a lot of it is around how does it get the information? How do we know if it's effective? How do we look at those metrics, and what are the success factors that we should be considering? And really the business of making sure that this is useful for their and how it can be useful for their user community. I think a lot of the questions are around how can we integrate additional data through, whether it be the SIS or the LMS, to be able to personalize these bots. I haven't talked a lot about that, but how can we ensure that we can securely provide data to a student, obviously once they're authenticated, is more relevant to them, right? If they're asking more specific questions, you can always set it up to refer them to the right place, whether it's logging into their SIS. But if you have a set of content and use cases that you can build to be able to pull that data when asked, I think that that's really important. And I think that's what a lot of institutions are at right now, which is they've gone beyond that FAQ bot. They're now talking about how do we use the rest of our data to be able to provide a really rich experience.
Yeah, what's as going beyond, what I think is kind of exciting is that, some schools will start with the bot to help with resetting passcodes and things like that, but now it's turning into, you mentioned OneStop, where it's going across many different departments to answer a whole variety of student issues and questions. Could you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, you can expand this out to just about any part of the institution: housing, parking, advising. Obviously not going to replace an advisor, but you can take it wherever students might need support, whether it be, the student ID cards, or, if they have, I'm not sure what they refer to it as, but your lunch program, right? There's no limit to where you can and how you can use this, but it's really about, making it relevant to the students. So, I think the key is that students will be happy with it, provided that they get the value out of it, which is really important when you're talking about multiple stakeholders and bringing other people in, right? They need to understand that, how that needs to work as well, so that, it's effective for them.
Yeah, and I think the way to measure that, right, is if enrollment and retention increases, it's working.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, there is data to support that.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, what do you, because you briefly said it, but I just want you to go deep into it. What should a school, how can they measure success? What should they do?
Well, obviously the big rocks we just talked about, the big items, which are more strategic. But I think more tactically, you really need to have a mechanism for feedback. So surveys, you'll see on a lot of chatbots, a thumbs up, thumbs down on the response. You need to monitor that, right? And also getting specific feedback from students, right? I may refer to students and users, kind of interchangeably, but also look at the accuracy metrics. If a chatbot has the good feature set, they're going to have a dashboard that allows you to see not just the number of conversations, but the number of successful conversations. And then you can look at that content and see not just, what they're asking, but how did the student interact with that bot and what might need to be adjusted, whether it be on the data or maybe you need to add data, right? Maybe they're asking questions that you had not necessarily thought of before. What's great about what I find is great about chatbots is, being from the contact center industry, you can take a call, read an email, and see tickets and get an idea about what students are asking about and where students need support, but you're not capturing everything, right? And there's really it's really difficult to do that. But with chatbot data, you can see pretty much everything that a student's asking for. And I mentioned earlier, some of those questions that they might not feel comfortable asking. Well, of course, we want them to ask those questions, right? That's what we're here for. So if you can more proactively provide that information and let them know, hey, it's okay. That's what we're here to support. I think that's important to be able to then be proactive around maybe outside of the chatbot to see how you might be able to transform some of your other content, whether it be, the website or whether it be, an orientation, et cetera. I think that can really help to inform those decisions.
What you said, which I think is really significant and ties back into before, that chatbots aren't going to eliminate jobs. The jobs are potentially going to change. And you said how that there's all these reports and that there's dashboards. So the job will become, as opposed to answering those repetitive questions, monitoring these different dashboards to see what's happening so that information could then be provided and updated to answer students' questions faster and more accurately. Wouldn't you agree?
And I think that, yes, absolutely. And I think that gets back to the point I was making about your stakeholders, because if you take that, through the, through to its conclusion, you know that that's not just going to be a job of one person in the IT department or one person in the OneStop department, financial aid, what have you. Now you're talking about strategic decision making, right? Because you're then pulling that data in to be able to provide additional insight that may impact large decisions that the institution may want to make, right? So when you're talking about new jobs, absolutely will be continue to be important to be able to use any data to be able to make data informed decisions, right? So whenever I've worked with an institution on maybe an enrollment campaign to drive enrollments or retention, it wasn't necessarily the impact of that campaign on enrollments that was the huge driver. I mean, it made an impact, but the feedback that was gathered during that was incredibly helpful. And I know that institutions are surveying students all the time, and they kind of feel surveyed to death. It may not be every place, but a lot of students I've talked to say that. So this is a great way to be able to gather useful information.
Well, and you said at the beginning, I just love that quote about calculators in the classroom. And so to me, these reports that are behind the chatbots in a similar way is that it's providing data so we can make more informed decisions. And it just, and it's like, to use the calculator analogy for a moment, it's like by doing that, and then later on with different statistical and mathematical programs on the computer, we were able to go from learning how to do the equations to what's this data telling us? How big is it? What trends are we seeing? And so similarly, we can do that here with the dashboards. Yeah.
I mean, if you're an institution, and you want to be a champion, of this kind of technology, there's no limit to the value that it can provide a university, and it just needs to be evangelized and understood that way. Because I don't know this firsthand, but I would expect that when you talk about AI and higher education, it's really focused on the pedagogy of it, right? So the academic piece is where the focus is. So I think this will help to maybe take a different perspective, so that it's not something to be fearful of, and helping folks understand how they can benefit from it.
And since you talked about championing this on campus, which some of our audience is here to learn more about that, what advice would you give them for what they should look for in partners and vendors as they go down this AI road?
Yeah, I think it depends on your resources in a large regard. Lots of providers have a built library of questions that they can provide that you then go, kind of answer. There's also the ability for the partner themselves to build out the data, or at least provide that initial kind of implementation that then can be maintained, whether that be by the institution, someone at the institution, or the provider. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's really where, not just in the beginning, but throughout that life cycle of the implementation, needs to be considered. But I also think you make sure that you have somebody who has experience in higher education and understands the unique needs of students. Also, they've got to have the right reporting and data that we've been talking about, right? So there are hundreds, maybe thousands, probably thousands of chatbot providers out there. But, I think you really want to understand what you need in terms of having some of the successful achievements that we talked about today, right? Like you need to be able to understand the technology that they use. What does the user interface look like? Can you test drive it? Can you touch it? Can you go out and see what some of the other, schools that are using that particular provider, what that looks like, and test that out, because they're all available, right? So, I think that's super important. Obviously, references is important. But I think those are some of the things that I would look at first.
Well, I really want to emphasize the one thing you said about they need to know higher education. Having also spent my full career in higher education, different ways, it's a unique place to be. And when you talk to somebody outside of it and have to translate what we say to what they say in other industries, can be a pretty big jump. So
Yeah.
to me, that's number one, because that's why you are who you are, is because you've been in higher ed for as long as you have, and the nuances of students versus just users, and what the needs are of working with staff and the various stakeholders across different departments.
Mm-hmm. That can sometimes be the most challenging part, but yes, that's super important, right? Because a lot of chatbot vendors will maybe be working with a corporate entity that has an entire marketing department that focusing on their chatbot or their AI strategy, right? And it's more B2C, right, where students are in this kind of mid place between the business of being a student and being a customer. They're not a customer
Right
away, right? I mean, sometimes we kind of go back and forth on that, but I know that that's a kind of a unique aspect of higher ed.
And we're passionate. I mean, people that are in higher ed, both our audience and us who serve higher ed, we do this because we want to help students at the end of the day. And
Yeah.
I will say, it's my opinion that people outside of higher ed don't understand that you have to have a passion for just wanting to help.
I think that's a great point. I think that there's different motivations, right? And that motivation is passion, and a lifelong, not just passion for serving students, but a passion for learning.
Yes, absolutely. So, Michael, as we wind down here, I want you to get your crystal ball out and look to the future. And what do you see we're going to be experiencing with AI and help desk support in the near future?
Well, I have no concept. I don't think we can necessarily conceive of the way that AI will change society. It absolutely will, and it seems like it's accelerating relatively quickly. So I think it's important. I know I'm kind of getting a little off topic here, but I want to just set that up first. Is that AI is not going to replace your job, but someone using AI might, right? So it's really important to stay on, and not necessarily on the cusp, but be aware of where those areas might be for professional training and development. But as far as how AI can be utilized, some of the things that are, currently in its infancy stage is emotional analytics. So AI can listen to a phone call, determine based on the tone of voice and the speech patterns, whether or not the student was pleased or frustrated, right? And so you can actually highlight those phone calls, and as a manager, as a leader, you can determine if it's what drove that dissatisfaction, what was the root cause, and you can use that tool to really provide additional training and guidance if needed for your folks that are answering the phone, or maybe there's a policy or procedure, or even more strategically, are you able to identify a trend or a pattern that you might be able to be proactive about resolving, right? So again, getting back to that student feedback, and it's really hard. You're not going to be able to listen to every phone call. We have a quality assurance team, and we listen to a sampling of calls. But being able to really pinpoint, a particular issue, it could also be a positive, right? So it doesn't have to just be a negative. Through that kind of emotional analytics is super cool, and I think that's going to really expand quite a bit. I think the conversational aspect of bot will continue to become more and more human-like, right? We've already started to see that, and I think I think there will become a comfort level with that, but I think it's going to be a little bit of friction. But I think that you're going to see that there's more and more that it can take on that a person can offload.
Well, and that's why, back to your point earlier, that start off small, identify what you need to do, and then grow it from there. It's a good way to start now, because as this continues to evolve into the future, it's a good way to keep pace with the changes if you're in it.
The other thing that I would strongly recommend, and this is something that I normally do, kind of recommend, is talk to service providers, talk to vendors, reach out on EDUCAUSE and see who might be a good one to talk to, because their experiences are probably more broad, and you can learn a lot. Right. And, the right partner will, take the time to explain what they can do, what they can't do, or what they could possibly do. Right. Because you can certainly, get creative. But the idea being that that's one avenue for professional growth. I think, there's lots of information on EDUCAUSE. There's lots of information or courses you can take on Coursera, which are more general, or if you want to get more technical, obviously there's a lot out there. But then also, obviously, at your institutions, there's probably, a program or two that, if not available, will be available soon. But I think I spend some time every day through LinkedIn. I've subscribed to a couple of AI leaderships, and I spend probably only 10, 15 minutes a day, because they're in really digestible chunks. But I would strongly recommend doing that so that you can remain current, and you could be ahead of the game, right? And so just understanding what the technology does and what we mean by generative AI, where it's generating answers versus being able to recall information in a conversational way.
Excellent. Well, we're wrapping up here because we're coming to the end of time. So if anyone has any questions, please take a moment and put them into the Q&A. And as we give people the opportunity to do that, Michael, what would be your closing thoughts for everyone today?
Closing thoughts.
Sorry, I didn't mean to stump you.
Yeah, no, I would say that it's a quote. AI is a story, but it's all about the data that drives it.
I like it. All right, well, it does not appear like there's any questions in the Q&A. So I just want to.
It's probably because I covered and explained everything brilliantly.
Yes, you did it so well.
So well.
But I do appreciate everybody that tuned in to Black Belt Helps Tech Talk. We're hoping to have more of these where it's going to be just issue based, and we're going to talk about whatever one subject it should be. So if you have any ideas for those in the audience, please just email us and let us know if you'd like us to cover a topic in the future. And if there's any panelists that you'd like to make sure that we bring on, also be happy to do that as well. Michael, I want to thank you again. It was wonderful talking with you. And to everybody out there, have a great day. And thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Frank, for having me.
Bye-bye.